This is lesson 7.3, more multiplication properties of exponents. Your objective is to raise a power to a power and to raise a product to a power. You can use properties of exponents to simplify a power raised to a power or a product raised to a power. To raise a power to a power. Whenever you're raising a power to a power, multiply the exponents. Which means if we have 5 to the 4th power, this quantity is being raised to the 2nd power, then we can rewrite this as 5 to the 4 times 2 power, and simplify that and get 5 to the 8th power. For example, what is a simplified form of n to the 4th power raised to the 7th power? Since this is a power being raised to a power, we take the 4 and the 7 and we multiply them, and we get n to the 28th power. In this problem, we have y to the 3rd power times y to the 5 over 2 power, that quantity being raised to the negative 2 power. So first we can deal with this factor here. Y to the 5 over 2 power being raised to the negative 2nd power really just means I can multiply those two exponents. And I can rewrite that as y to the negative 10 over 2 power, which simplifies to negative 5. Now I have y to the 3rd power times y to the negative 5th power, and since I have the same base, all I have to do is add those exponents, and I get y to the negative 2nd power. Remember, we don't write our expressions with negative exponents. We don't leave them in that way, so we have to change them into positive exponents by rewriting this as 1 over y to the 2nd power. We can use repeated multiplication to simplify an expression like 4 times m to the 1/2 power, that entire quantity, raised to the 3rd power. So here we're raising a product to a power. When you raise a product to a power, raise each factor to the power and then multiply. For example, if we have the quantity 3x raised to the 4th power, we can rewrite that as 3 to the 4th power, so 3 is one of the factors, and then x as the other factor raised to the 4th power. Simplify the 3 to the 4th as 81, and we get 81 times x to the 4th power. If the side length of a square is 5x to the 3rd power, then how do we find the area? Well, if one side is 5x to the 3rd power, we know that we can square the length to find the area. So we get the quantity 5x cubed raised to the 2nd power. Since we're raising a product to a power, we take each factor in that product and raise it to the power outside. So we have 5 to the 2nd power times x to the 3rd power being raised to the 2nd power. 5 to the 2nd power just simplifies to 25. And here we have a product, a power raised to a power, so we could just multiply the two exponents here, 3 and 2, and we get x to the 6th power. We want to simplify here n to the 1/2 power raised to the 10th power, and then we have the quantity 4mn to the negative 2 over 3 power, that entire quantity raised to the 3rd power. So first we'll deal with the first factor, this one, n to the 1/2 power raised to the 10th power. Well, I just multiplied the half and the 10, and I get 5, so n to the 5th power. For the product, I have to multiply each of the factors. I have to raise each of the factors to that exponent. So I get 4 to the 3rd power, m to the 3rd power, and then I have n to the negative 2 over 3 power to the 3rd power. Well, this here is a power raised to a power, so I just multiply the two exponents. Negative 2 over 3 times 3 will just give me negative 2. So basically I have n to the 5th power, 4 to the 3rd power, m to the 3rd power, and n to the negative 2nd power. Since I have two factors that have the same base, n to the 5th power and n to the negative 2nd power, I just have to add those two exponents, and I can rewrite that as n to the 3rd power. M to the 3rd power does not have another factor with the same base, so that just stays, and 4 to the 3rd power simplifies to 64. Here we have p to the 1/2 power raised to the 1/4 power. Well, since it's a power being raised to a power, I just multiply the two exponents and I get p to the 1/8 power. Here we have x to the 2nd power multiplied by x to the 6th power being raised to the -4th power. So let's just deal with this part first. Since it's a power being raised to a power, you can just multiply those two exponents. So I'll rewrite this as x to the 2nd power times x to the -24th power. And because I have the same base, all I have to do is add the two exponents, and I get x to the -22 power. But we don't leave anything with negative exponents, so we need to rewrite this as 1 over x to the 22nd power. We have 7m to the 9th power, this quantity being raised to the 3rd power. So we take each of the factors and raise it to that power on the outside. So I have 7 to the 3rd power times m to the 9th power being raised to the 3rd power. Well, 7 to the 3rd power is just 343, and m to the 9th power times to the 3rd power, I just multiply the 9 and the 3, so that's just m to the 27th power. Here we have x to the -2nd power, that quantity being raised to the 2nd power, times 3xy to the 5th power, this entire quantity being raised to the 4th power. Since this is a power being raised to a power, I get x to the -4th power. And since I have a product being raised to a power, I just take each of the factors and raise it to the 4th power. So I have 3 to the 4th, x to the 4th, and y to the 5th power being raised to the 4th power. Alright, so I have 3 to the 4th power, which is just 81. I have x to the -4th power and x to the 4th power. Since these both have the same base, I just add the exponents. Well, -4 plus 4 is 0, and any number to the 0 power is just 1. And then I have y to the 5th power being raised to the 4th power, which simplifies to y to the 20th power.